Okay, so this is definitely not the final appearance of a collage and stuff, but what I want to do is just show you some possible things you can play around with as far as making the background look a little bit more interesting. So right now the contrast on this, the edges and stuff, they're pretty crusty. I'm not really exactly excited by this, and it definitely doesn't have enough photos and stuff in here. But what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to hide these layers, and we're just going to play around with this background a little bit. Now, this is going to be experimenting, so as we go through this, I may end up deciding, oh gosh, that's horrible. So I'm just showing you different techniques, not expecting to memorize all this. Remember, this is about identification, seeing what's possible, and then asking me questions. So one of the first things that I could do with something like this is I could actually do something where I'm going to duplicate this layer so I don't mess up the first one, and I'm going to convert this to a smart object. That way, whatever changes I make, I can always undo or I can mask later. Then what I'm going to try is I'm going to come up to Filter, and I'm going to go to Filter Gallery. Now, I remember before when I did Filter Gallery that the screen didn't record this, so I'm not sure if it's going to or not. So I'm going to tell you what the settings are that I'm changing. What I'm going to do is when I'm in the Filter Gallery, if you can't see it, is I am going to go to Texture. It's the last one. We did this when we did the drawing for the girl. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to choose Texturizer. And then in the sequence of things at the top under Texturizer, I'm going to go ahead and change that to Sandstone. I'm going to change the scaling to about 140 or so. I'm going to change the relief. I'm going to change the relief and make it kind of heavy and put it at about 10. And then I'm going to change the lighting to bottom. So that's texture, riser, sandstone, 140, 10 relief, bottom is the light direction. And I'm going to click OK. So it creates this kind of rough edge. So once I have that, I can start playing around with a couple different things. So this part, just experimenting. Don't know if this is going to be really nice looking or not. This is just playing around. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to utilize a shape. So my toolbar disappeared to the other screen. So I'm going to bring this back. So I'm going to come over here to my custom shapes. So we already tried one where it was the trees. Now, if your custom shapes don't have all of the stuff that's here, remember, you can go to this gear that's inside of the shapes, and you can choose large thumbnail so you can see the stuff. And then you can choose all, and it will list all the stuff that's in here. So let's go ahead and try a couple different things. Let's try, I don't know, this little blast is kind of cool. I like this one. So this little piece here, this little wheel, I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click away. I'm going to start up here in a corner, and I'm just going to drag. And if I hold down my space bar, I can move this thing around. And I can draw the thing right there. Now, one of the things, if you didn't see before, is right up here. I changed this to shape. I'm actually going to take the stroke off. And for the fill, I don't know. I'll grab like a darker color or something. That can always change later. And I'm just going to drag. So I have this kind of coming out from the center. So that in and of itself, all right, a little bit more visually interesting. But some things you can experiment with is right here in the layer style. I clicked on it, and now I'm just going to move my mouse or my arrow keys down. Or if that's not working for you, you can go one by one and see what it does. So just that there alone is doing something a little interesting. So it depends on the color of your background. It depends on what color you used for the shape. Sometimes that can be interesting. So if you find something that you like, and I don't know which one I want to use because I'm not really too worried about it. If it's too dark, you can always lower the opacity and kind of see what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that here. I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit. I'm going to bring those back just to kind of see. And already kind of cool, kind of interesting. Another thing I can do with that shape that's kind of cool is, let me turn those off, is if I go to edit and I'm going to go to transform, free transform, Right up here in the top portion where the free transform is, there's this button right here. This is going to allow you to warp this. If you zoom out, see it's got these little handles on the side, much like we used with the pin tool for the LeBron James. You can bend these and stretch them out. And you can grab from the center and move these as well. So you can use this to bend and really warp a lot of this and do some interesting, like I'm just stretching this and twirling it a little bit. I'm just playing around. I click OK, and now all of a sudden I went from that to this. So just that alone, that's kind of cool. Another thing I could apply if I really wanted to, and it doesn't have to be this swirl. You could try it with some of the other shapes and see what it looks like. You can actually apply a layer style to that particular shape. I'm going to go in and I'm going to make this look like it was punched in a little bit. So I'm going to try, whoops, wrong one. I don't want adjustments. I want effects. I'm going to try doing like an inner shadow. And I'm not sure if the dialog box is showing up because I've had issues with that before. But if it is, what I'm going to change is I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply. I'm going to change the opacity to about 85. I'm going to move my mouse over inside the screen and kind of pull this around a little bit. That's kind of cool. So I'm doing negative 106 for the angle. For the distance, I can do about 17. And my size, the smaller it is, the sharper the line, the further it out it is, the more it blurs. It's going to give off the illusion that it's a little bit deeper. So I've got multiply with black as the color, 86 opacity, negative 106, distance. So you just kind of play around with it. I don't know why I keep telling you those. I'm thinking like you're actually making this exact thing, which you're not. But then that ends up giving me that little bit of like a 3D effect. I could even go back in and apply like a gradient on here if I wanted. So I'm going to go back on the effect and I'm going to go to gradient overlay. I'm going to switch this to radial instead of linear. Radial is where it does like a circle instead. And let me see. Yeah. So it just kind of darkens those edges up a little bit, but that's not that great. I might drop the opacity a little bit. I might even play around with the blending modes just to kind of see what happens, because sometimes like, ooh, that's kind of cool. Sometimes the stuff pops out and you're like, I wasn't expecting that. It wasn't what I was really originally looking for, but depending on what you're, I mean, if you're open to experimenting a little bit with this, you can sometimes come up with something that you weren't really intending, but still kind of looks pretty cool. Like, that looks cool. All right. So that's another thing you can do. You can play around with just the shapes and throw that kind of stuff on there. And then you can always fade the entire thing out. So if you decide, wow, that's just a little too heavy, I'm going to shrink that down and fade that out a little bit. And then you've got stuff that's there. Now, another thing you could do is, let me see if I've got a copy of this. I really don't like that texture. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look for some kind of vintage texture here. I try to stay away from iStock photo, and I also stay away from the 123 RF. Those are usually ones that you either have to pay for or have a big giant watermark in the middle. I like using the Pinterest ones. I also like using the Flickr ones. You're more apt to find something that's not going to cost you money or have big watermarks on there. But this is part of the problem with trying to find some things. You may have to click around and try a while to see if you can get it. So I'm going to try this one. See if maybe this lets me get something. Come on. Doop, doop, doop. All right, maybe I'll try that one. Okay, cool. Flickr should let me do it. Now, most of these Flickr ones are pretty good size, and usually you can just click this little download button, and choose the biggest one you can. Like this, I'm going to choose large. Because remember, it's better to have a larger file and shrink it down. But once again, if you're using Cameo, you want to make sure that you are saving as often as possible. In fact, it's not a bad idea, even if you're not in Cameo, to constantly save. That way, if something crashes, you're not going to lose all of the work that you've done. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that image and put it into my collage. I'm going to drop it right on top. Now, since I'm going to use this as a texture, it's not really going to matter if I distort it a little bit. So I'm stretching it without keeping it straight. The way you can do that on the 2020 version is you hold down the Shift key and it'll let you stretch the thing out a little bit. But what I'm looking to do is take this texture, not for the color, although the color could work. I mean, watch this. If I move that shape above that one, that's kind of cool. And that was just a quick little drag. If I decided I wanted a different color of this, if I decided, well, I like this texture that's coming through, now that I played around with that, I kind of like that. But I want the actual paper texture to be a different color. So I could come in here and do like a hue and saturation. And I'm going to clip that. I'm going to hold down the Alt or the Option right in between there. And what I can do is I can start to drag these around. And it's not really doing much because I didn't... there we go. It took a second. Oh, that's kind of cool. I kind of like the blue. Saturate it. Oh, not liking the saturation as much. Maybe lighten it a little bit. Yeah, that's kind of cool. So just with that, I was just experimenting. Really, it was a texture and then playing around with some of those shapes, and you get something that turns out kind of interesting and looks like you spent a really long time working on that, and you really didn't. Then if you had something like that and you decided, all right, I'm pretty happy with that, there's all these other things you can do. And it's just a matter of if you find something online that you really like I'm going to convert that to object, but you're not sure how to create that effect, hit me up and I'll see if I can recreate that effect for you and walk you through how to potentially do it. Like I like to use this lens correction filter. And I don't know if that's showing up in this box over here, so I'm going to talk through it. But the idea is I'm going to make this vignette. So I did this custom in the background. And I'm going to do this vignette to kind of darken up the outside. Since I have the pictures in the center, by darkening up the outside, what it does is it draws your attention towards the middle a little bit more. And even if I turn off that piece, or I can even play around, if I decide I kind of like that stuff underneath, I can start using those blending modes again, playing around with it. See, it's giving me these little stripes. And you might end up like, that's actually kind of cool. So a lot of times with this, it's discovery and it's accidents and it's just kind of playing around. Now, of course, I know a lot about those layers and all the different things and how to do that. So it may seem easier for me than when you get into it, but definitely let me know if there's something that I did that you want to try to recreate, or if you find something online that you want me to help you recreate, just let me know. I'm here to help out as much as I can.